How are things going with your team and with the business?
Yeah, I feel like we're probably similar in the same boat as a lot of other SaaS companies. Um, we saw a, probably our biggest loss that we've had in a long, long time in the past 4 weeks. Um, but probably not as bad as some SaaS companies. I mean, I've heard of a lot who have lost 10 to 20% of their entire um, monthly revenue in the past few weeks. So we're at like 2 or 3% down.
Okay.
Um,
So that's actual MRR that you've lost.
yeah, that's right. So you know,
Not too bad overall.
not too bad overall. I mean, it puts us in to like in January, I hired 3 new people. So like that, and that was predicated on like even like all our forecasting. Um, we were hiring ahead of revenue, but not by a ton. And, we've pretty consistently had some level of growth for just about every month. So it's like, okay, that's fine. I'm comfortable with like spending that money that we've got in the bank a little early, and then we'll make up for it. And then, whatever that is, 2 months later, like everything's hitting the fan. So that puts us in we're in a tight spot there. So like I've applied for the US like paycheck protection stuff. But I mean, half our team's not even in the US, so like they don't even qualify for that. But like, it'll help some.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And are you seeing like Barometrics has some aggregate anonymized data for your customers, right? Are you seeing any trends like and I'm not very good with data. I don't know how you analyze it. Do you analyze it by median or averages? But are you seeing anything right now that um, is, I don't know, noteworthy or not really?
I don't know, like probably nothing outside of what you would expect. Um, I think it's like pretty much across the board, everybody's losing money or customers. Some more than others, and a lot of that's like industry specific. Like I think the closer you are to um like the consumer side or like the prosumer side, typically, and there's always anomalies, you're going to see a lot more MRR loss, just because a lot of those people are already like probably operating on pretty thin margins, or don't have a lot of extra expenses that they can really absorb, or they're just more easily sort of freaked out about some sort of recession or anything like that. So that's that's probably a little bit of something that's kind of like pretty consistent. But I mean, at the same time, it's just like everybody's what we're seeing a lot of is like people is cancellations due to either their own business drying up, or them just being cautious and trying to tighten up cash flow. Um,
Yeah. One of the things that's been so tricky about this, I think, for SaaS companies is, well, first of all, so many of us are new. Like we've never gone through a recession before.
right.
Even I heard, Nathan Barry was talking about how he was thinking through ConvertKit stuff, and he's pretty young, and he remembers the last recession in 2008, I think he was saying, but he wasn't an operator then, and
Right.
now we have this new crop of SaaS owners. The other weird thing about SaaS is that it feels like there's like our crop of SaaS, which I am a late comer to.
Mhm.
So like how long have you been doing barometrics? Since
The metrics we're in our 7th year.
seventh year. Okay. So we're recent, right?
Yeah.
And but before like this crop of SaaS owners, it's like it only feels like there's like 5 people.
Right.
It's like and Jason Fried and Jason Cohen and Rob Walling and Peldy
Right.
and Natalie. Like
Yeah.
but there's like it just doesn't feel like that group's that big, you know? And I don't know how they're thinking about it. Maybe they're just so because some of your resiliency must come from like at a certain point the numbers matter. Like if you're doing whatever $5 million a month in MRR and you've got whatever Basecamp has 30 people or whatever, you must have a lot of more margin in there just because the numbers are bigger. As long as you haven't, your costs are relatively static. But
Right.
I don't know. Maybe they're dying right now.
I mean, the problem is like it depends on. So for us, it's like the lion's share of our expenses is in payroll. So, we don't have the overhead. We're like a typical remote company in that we don't have some like massive office rent. Like probably the biggest expense for us after payroll would be like infrastructure, kind of like servers. And I mean that stuff's tens of thousands a month, but like it's still not anywhere close to payroll. And so when you're talking about like needing to really move the needle on bridging the gap, you don't have a lot of wiggle room depending on how close you're operating to. I mean, if you're just pumping out tons of profit every month, well, great, you're fine. But it just depends on like where your expenses are really tied up in. Like I think the nice part, there's a lot, especially like in the e-commerce world, most of your expenses are typically tied up in either like marketing costs, where you're basically having to pay to acquire every single purchase and customer, which you can turn that down, but that a lot of times also dries up your ability to spend money to source products and produce stuff. So I don't know, that's like a weird chain of events, but like on the SaaS side, usually the margins are really good, but it just depends on how, this is why like every SaaS company ultimately goes out of business, or all the SaaS companies that go out of business, it's almost always because of payroll, like their inability to, they can't just turn that off, right? Like you can't adjust that knob very, very easily.
Yeah. And so how are you personally thinking about riding this out? Like, are you pretty scared or how are you feeling right now?
So we've forecasted out a few different scenarios. I mean, there are scenarios where like we run out of money, unless something changes. But like that's not like a scenario where like that happens in like the next month or 2 months or 6 months even. Like we've got a decent amount of cash in the bank and some runway to like figure some things out. So where we're at now is, and that not every scenario results in us running out of money. Like that's some of like the really pessimistic stuff does, but like we've also got plenty of scenarios where we don't grow at all and we're fine. So I think that, but what that's led to is like, so I've talked to the team about that. And where we're all sort of at is like feeling, I think like we've sort of rallied the troops and everybody feels like, okay, there's some things that we had wanted to focus on, but we can't, like now the focus needs to be on retention and, growth when that's possible. But like what we need to try to not do is lose a ton of customers. So, it's like, well, that's the focus. And so we'll focus a lot on that instead of, trying to go get a bunch of new customers. Because like the new customer stuff is always like a bit of a crapshoot and you're just trying stuff and seeing what sticks. But right now we've got a pretty big hole in the bucket that we need to plug up as much as is possible, given the circumstances.
Yeah. Are you using your forecasting tool to forecast some of your cash flow stuff?
Yeah. So what sort of like we use, so there's I guess app now. I don't know. It was one guy when we started using him a few years ago, But so they have an app called Flight Path that ties into Baremetrics. Like it pulls in Baremetrics data for it, but it also, the big thing with it is it's pulling in expense, like it ties into QuickBooks too. So it's much more on the accounting side of forecasting. And it's in like just super detailed. And so we do all the forecasting, that like cash forecasting there. So,
and has it actually been helpful? Like, do you think is it useful to do all that stuff? Do you think the forecasts will be reasonably accurate, or how do you think around that stuff?
Yeah, well, so we've been using him and various incarnations of this app that he's got for 3 years, 4 years, something like that. So we've got the entire history of the like what the forecast has predicted, along with how it actually performed, and it's been pretty spot on for like every month. So I trust it a lot. Obviously, like the forecast can't. There are no like global pandemic variables in the forecasting spreadsheet that like it knows about, but like the nice part is being able to like play out, like we'll graph multiple scenarios. Like, okay, if we're completely flat on growth for the next year, what does that look like? If we hire 3 more people, what does that look, and the dates that we hire them, what does that look like? And all that kind of stuff. So it's helpful. It's,